Hello everyone. This is our 13th lecture, and today we are going to study the flow of foreign aid and private capital to developing countries. The history of foreign aid spending, particularly US aid, and the rise of private capital flow provides useful background to the analysis. Real inflation adjusted US spending on foreign and reached a peak of $51 billion in 1997 dollars. In 1947, the height of post-war reconstruction, which involved large quantity of aid to help rebuild Europe. In 1997, foreign aid was around 14 billion, at less than 1% of federal outlay in that year. US spending on foreign aid was at its lowest level of the post-war era. US aid spending has tended to follow the nation's strategy priorities. In the 1940s, Europe received the most US assistance as war-torn European nations rebuilt their national economies and infrastructure. In 1950s and 1960s, Asian countries, particularly South Korea, Taiwan, and South Vietnam, received about half of US bilateral assistance. In 1970s, US priorities shifted to the Middle East. The United States began large security and economic assistance programs to Israel and Egypt. Since 1979, the year of Camp the year of Camp David Accord, countries in the Middle East have received about half of all US bilateral aid. The foreign aid spending of bilateral donors have also tended to follow their political or economic interests. Japan, for example, devotes the majority of its aid spending to countries in Asia. France gives most of its aid to its former colonies, and does Britain. That that pattern appears to be less true. However, for some of the smaller aid donors, the countries, for example, their resources to the secondary, sorry, devotes their resources to the countries they perceive to be the most needy. Bilateral institutes such as World Bank Group and regional multilateral development bank have generally favored the poorest country in the developing world. In 1991-1992, for example, multilateral donors gave over 45% of their concessional assistance, grants, or loan at a low interest rate to the least developed countries. By contrast, individual nations gave less than a quarter of their concession, concessional assistance to that the same group of countries. Development and the role of foreign aid. Many different factors contribute to development. Unique historical, geographical, or cultural influences may play an important role in determining whether or how fast a country develops. Factors such as a climate that is inhospitable to productive agriculture are often beyond the control of policymakers in developing countries or their foreign donors. Nevertheless, the academic and the policy literature on development generally argues that a political and economic choices developing countries and make an important role in determining how well and how fast they develop. Domestic economic policy. Sound economic management and outward oriented trade and industrialization strategies are important economic component of successful development. Non-inflationary monetary policies and low budget deficits provides a favorable environment for saving and the accumulation of capital, whereas large deficits, high inflation, and the resulting financial instability work against them. Uncontrolled fiscal policies have contributed the problem of large deficits, as have large government payrolls, ineffective government industries, and various subsidy programs. Government may expand the money supply to pay for the deficit, a step that often leads to inflation and overvalued exchange rate and the production of goods that are less competitive in world market. The extent of countries' openness and its integration in the world economy and trading system appears particularly important to development. The discipline of the world market prices make it much harder to sustain dictionary domestic policies that might divert the economy's resources to wasteful and inefficient uses.